Hey Internet, what's going on? My name's James Bodie, and you're watching Relative Motion. This is a channel all about showing you the coolest places on Earth and the best means for you to get there. Now this episode is the first episode of Season 3, and it's a special season because it's the first season about some places to check out. Now, if you're following along, I'd just like to make you aware this is going to be the last season I'm going to start before I finish the first 3 seasons, even though we're just breaking the surface. We're going to be traveling to the edge of the world to look at the last continent, Antarctica. This place is without a doubt the most uninhabitable place on Earth, but you might be surprised how many cool places this Arctic wasteland actually has to offer. This first episode is going to be an exploration overview, where we basically highlight the places we're going to look at and just give you a really good foundation for starting this season. So, let's just get right into it.
It got me stone cold. You got me stone cold. You got me stone cold.
Now, unfortunately, we're not going to see any crossover yet between vehicles and places we're going to look at. Maybe for the obvious fact that small helicopters and dinky travel trailers probably don't belong here. Now, Antarctica is a very special and unique place. The name comes from a Roman interpretation of a Greek word, which means opposite of the Arctic, which is a little odd considering this basically is the Arctic. After the New World was discovered, people quickly started looking to finishing discovering the rest of the world, and ideas started to form of the existence of a land to the south like this. However, it remained undiscovered for over 300 years, and was discovered first by the Russians in about 1820, and still to this day has remained very uninhabited, and is really only used for research and expedition currently. The research mostly focuses on, obviously, the ground itself, including the ice and underground lakes and other things like that, and then also the atmosphere, and specifically the ozone layer. In the current day, it is still the most unpopulated area in the world, and by a lot. Each person here has about 12,500 square miles all to themselves, if you were to divide it up equally. And the entire continent has a population of around 1,000 to 5,000 people. This population swings so widely due to the seasons, and has a population of about 1,000 people in the winter and 5,000 in the summer, and fluctuates seasonally. The reason for this being so unpopulated has largely to do with the fact that this place is very uninhabitable. This place is essentially an Arctic desert. It's just the opposite of what you would typically think of as a desert. So, where a desert's super hot, this is super cold, and there's also very little precipitation here, life in general. There's tons of sunlight when there is sunlight. This place is even more of a desert. Antarctica is home to the McMurdo valleys. This place is the driest place in the world and hasn't seen precipitation in 2 million years. Some of the other reasons this is such a popular tourist destination, the biggest one is the temperature. In the winter months here, it's pretty common for it to get to a pretty warm temperature of negative 81 degrees Fahrenheit, and has the record recorded temperature on Earth of negative 128 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's pretty appealing. Another thing is it's the windiest continent on this planet, where it's not uncommon to have gusts up to 100 miles per hour, and has a yearly average wind speed of 12 miles per hour, which is really good at making the temperature even colder by a factor of the wind chill. And then if that wasn't enough, this, again, which makes it just like a desert, is the place where you will get the most sunburn on Earth. A big reason for this is the fact that white reflects all light, and this place is a desert of white, so in the summer months, potentially bring some swimwear if you're looking to get a really good tan. And then to really top it off, this place is basically lacking in all sorts of food, any source of fuel, energy, or just really resources in general. And of course, finally, the lack of people. So if you actually need help or anything, that's really not going to happen. So some of the factors that contribute to this place being so cold, especially if you compare it to the North Pole, which it's much colder than. Probably the largest factor is the lack of the ocean currents, which really help circulate heat around the Earth. So for all the continental records this place holds, it holds another one also for being the tallest continent on average. This is because most of Antarctica sits on about a mile-high sheet of ice, and this ice is so massive that it actually holds about 70 to 80% of the world's freshwater supply. Now, if you're looking at Antarctica, a lot of this ice is concentrated to the east, which in turn also makes it much taller in the east, which then also has the effect of making it much colder. Admittedly though, this east and west side is a little arbitrary considering east to west in Antarctica sends you in a giant circle. People largely consider the west side to include the peninsula and the east side to be opposite of that. So at the lower elevations, which is going to be closer to the coast around Antarctica, and like I just mentioned, a little bit more to the west, those areas are going to get more of the precipitation, which obviously is going to be largely in the form of snow. Also in these similar low elevation areas is where the warmest temps are going to be. In the summer months of Antarctica, it is known to get above freezing in these areas, somewhere between 32 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. These large temperature swings from 50 all the way down to negative 80 and beyond is due to the extreme seasons that exist in Antarctica. Now these exist because of the erratic sunlight and darkness hours that exist in Antarctica. In Antarctica, it is very common to have full days of darkness in the winter and full days of light in the summer, which is a very bizarre experience. And I really hope you don't end up like those people in 28 days later. So in this season, and basically in general, Antarctica I would kind of break into three sections of interest. The first and most obvious piece is going to be the peninsula. The second piece of interest is the Ross Ice Shelf, which is the largest ice shelf in Antarctica and is also home to the largest base, and some other very interesting features only found in that part of Antarctica. And then the last section is going to be the high mainland, and like I mentioned earlier, that's mostly going to be to that hypothetical east. And some of the points of interest in this area are going to be mountains and lakes. And yes, believe it or not, there are surface lakes in Antarctica. Now, because of the fact Antarctica is basically unclaimed for all intents and purposes, it is loosely divided up into territories claimed by different countries. However, at a quick glance, you can see how convoluted this system is. For example, the United Kingdom, Argentina, and Chile all have laid claim to the same area. And then, another weird example is the fact that the US has claimed no part of Antarctica, even though they probably hold the largest presence. And the part they hold the largest presence on has actually been claimed by New Zealand. So really, for all intents and purposes, these boundaries really don't exist. And all loosely revolve around a treaty signed in the 1900s to basically lay some ground rules between developed nations about what can and cannot be done in Antarctica. Really, the only human establishment in Antarctica are around the 70 bases that have been established by different countries around the world. 30 separate countries at least have one base in Antarctica. However, only 40 of these bases are actually open year-round, while the other 30 are only seasonal. There are very few resources in Antarctica. I'd say mostly due to the fact a lot of it's buried under ice. However, some things like fuel and other precious metals have been found here, but remains largely undeveloped because of the prohibitive cost and dangers of getting these. The only industry that really exists in Antarctica, besides the research, if you even want to call that an industry, is a fair amount of fishing done around the coast, and then also the around 37,000 tourists that actually make it to Antarctica each year, which is pretty crazy considering that's almost 8 times the population of Antarctica, only in the summer months. This remains today by far the largest piece of unconquered land that is still on Earth. There even is still no currency that exists in Antarctica, and the only currency traded involves the different currencies brought by the different countries from around the world. So if you want to go a different route than Elon Musk, where he's trying to start civilization in outer space, which is already going to be much harder, you could start your own country in Antarctica. But you're not going to be able to do it for long. So I'm really going to try and leave politics out of this and use a very objective source of Wikipedia, where you should note that last year was the warmest summer yet in Antarctica and reached up to 70 degrees around the coast, which is an all-time record high. So the Earth is definitely in a warming trend right now. So you might want to get to this exotic winter wonderland before it's been changed forever. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this exploration overview of Antarctica. I would really like to apologize if I've hurt any flat earthers in this video, but if you're not a flat earther, I really hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did and you want to see more about Antarctica or vehicles to get you around the world, go ahead and click that subscribe button. And if you haven't yet, make sure you hit the notifications button so you won't miss an episode. In the next episode, we're going to look at our first stop, the port town, if you even want to call it that, an entrance to Antarctica, the Stars Village. So make sure you don't miss that one. And until next time, I'm James Bodie, and you've been watching Relative Motion.
It got me stone cold.